there was the slightest hope that my next job was going to be flying a Falcon. So we said no to the sure thing of going back to Sydney Seaplanes, and we hedged our bets that this would come off. Now, of course, there was no guarantee, but somehow deep down it had to happen for me.
Welcome aboard the HiflyMedia Podcast, dedicated to sharing the stories and experiences of the amazing people who make aviation happen. From pilots like me to engineers, air traffic controllers and others. I'll explore their personal journeys, the challenges they've faced and the triumphs they've achieved. My name is Damien and I'll be your host. Whether you're a seasoned aviation enthusiast or new to the field, I invite you to join me as we take off on this journey of discovery. Welcome to the HiflyMedia Podcast. Today we're honoured to have a true aviation expert, Alex Penrose, join us on the podcast. With a wealth of experience as a Global 6500 captain and a seasoned corporate pilot, Alex's journey in the skies has taken him from the serene Gold Coast to the vibrant streets of Tokyo. Join us as we navigate through his aviation journey, exploring the highs, challenges and the breathtaking views from seaplanes to high-performance jets. Thank you so much for coming on, Alex. I definitely appreciate it, and I'm sure after our listeners finish this episode, they'll also appreciate your input.
No problem, thank you, my pleasure.
Now, Alex and I just had a quick chat, and obviously in preparing for catching up with him today, we've had to compare calendars and time zones. Alex, you're sitting in Vancouver at the moment, is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. So it's our final trip of the year. I'm currently staying at the Westin. Anyone who knows Vancouver, it looks right over the harbour down there. So I'm actually, as we speak, looking at a single engine Osra about to land. So it's definitely taken me back to my previous aviation career before the jets. So definitely pretty cool to be here right now.
That's so cool. And just take us through, if you don't mind, your flight legs to get to Vancouver. Where did you come from? Where did you originate from?
Rather uneventfully boring. This is basically because Russia is closed at the moment for most foreign aircraft, and I can't give too much away in registrations about what the aircraft registration is or who I fly. But at the moment, the aircraft, the 6500, has basically been a very nice nip and tuck of the global express platform. So it's got updated engines and a bit of a cleaner wing, if you want to call it that.
Nice.
So it now gives us the range to get back from Western Europe all the way back to Tokyo. Unfortunately, though, with Russia still closed, we can't make it non-stop to Europe. So what we do as an operation, and what a few other aircraft have been doing, they've been either using Vancouver or Seattle as basically a tech stop. So fly as fast as you can over to Vancouver. We normally do it at 0.85. We do cruise swap there. We're on the ground. We put fuel back in it, and then the aircraft then continues on to Europe. So part of the challenges with Russia being closed, but we've got this down fairly. There's a fairly slick operation now to be able to have crew waiting there to do the swap, and that's why I'm currently sitting in Vancouver, because I flew the aircraft in with one of the other pilots, and we're actually waiting for it to come back. So in a few days' time, we'll fly it back to Tokyo.
Lovely. So you got a few days of R&R in Vancouver, and then back for hop across the Pacific.
Yeah, another Pacific. I don't particularly want to call it R&R because I know my wife will be listening in the future. And unfortunately, it's been one of the worst weeks to be away with two children with temperatures, and she's just coming out of influenza as well. So, but she, the unsung hero, she is at home looking after the children. So I don't want to say it's R&R, but it's definitely we are waiting for the aircraft to arrive back so we can fly it back.
Well, I say R&R, but there's the sweating that you'll be doing all that important flight planning, and
And of course, it.
Yeah. Absolutely. She knows what's going on. Just bring us something back nice. Yes.
I think that's the plan.
Okay. So this aircraft, and I did a bit of a quick research on. To be honest, when you said you were a Global 6500 captain, I was like, who makes that? And then I went and had a dig around and saw that it was Bombardier. And it appears that it's like excuse me for my ignorance on this airframe, it appears that it's like a shortened version of CRJ.
I don't want to say shortened because it is still quite a big machine. The best way to think about it is, because we fly on the FAA, so all our recurrents are done in feet. So basically, imagine a 100-foot by 100-foot box. That's basically our platform. The CRJ, the shorter ones, are definitely smaller than us. I'm not too sure about the CRJ 900, but we sit a bit higher. And if you look at how basically where the wing box is on the Global, you can see the main difference between the shape of it. Even though the Bombardier aircraft all look very similar, the main difference is like the slight bulge around the wing box, and that's where a lot of our fuel is stored. So so that's like a slight giveaway to pick out a Global from a CRJ. And also, we've got much more, I don't want to say more powerful because I don't know the stats on them, but our engines are considerably bigger than the CRJ as well. So a few subtle differences, but if you see, especially in the US, we do see a CRJ that has been converted to a business jet. From afar, they do look quite similar.
Right. Yeah, that's probably what got me. And then is it true that our Australian Air Force here are flying, I'm going to call it the little sibling?
Yeah, so the Challenger 600 is in business jet land. That's a super mid-size, so it's got the same cabin width as the Global.
Okay.
But definitely it's a bit more stunted. And that is a lot closer related to the actual airliner than we are. So
right.
the Challenger is more so a derivative per se of the CRJ, whereas the Global was from day one a clean sheet design business jet. So
yeah, beautiful. I did get to sit in a Gulfstream 650 at like Avalon 2013, and it was just beautiful. So I'm kind of thinking it's on that same kind of level.
It is. It's both the 650 and the Global. They call it basically the four big screens in it is the Vision flight deck, and it's so user intuitive. We use the track rules. The FMS is got a very logical flow to it, and for spending long hours at a time, it is a very nice place to work. My only complaint, especially now after being on it for nearly 5 years and then having come from the Falcon, is that for the longer range flights, it would be nice to go back to side stick. I know some people are going to be screaming right now going, oh no, I can't believe we said that. But for the operation that these aircraft do, when they've got a range of 10, 11, 12 hours, it's for how little you do hand fly them. That extra little space would be nice again, but then in saying that, no, I do love the actual platform, the Global platform, especially now the slight nip and tuck of the 6500. But yeah, it's if you look at the cockpit, it's very similar to the 650, but this I'm going to have a few people go, oh no, he's not a Gulfstream lover, but the avionics in the Global are probably a good 5-6 years ahead of where the Gulfstream is,
right.
The 650. But then with the new Gulfstream, they're probably taking another leap ahead of us. So it's a very, very, there's a lot of rivalry in the industry. They're all trying to outdo each other, which again for us as pilots is a good thing as well, because we get newer and better toys from it.
That's right. That's exactly right. So, okay, we've talked about you captaining a Global 6500. You've mentioned the Dassault Falcon. I want to go right back. So can you tell us about what shaped interest in aviation, and including what inspired you to pursue this career in aviation?
Oh, of course. I was, one of those people one of those boys who just loved absolutely anything that moved if it had an engine, whether it's a car or aircraft or, a truck or a bus. And I did, I've said very, very early on that growing up in the UK, up until we moved to Australia, we lived near one of the busiest, maybe not the best to some people, but as far as a young boy is concerned, one of the best airports around, and that was Heathrow.
Right.
So, in and out to see, the classic 747s, 757s, and especially Concorde, just
Oh, wow.
the impression that aircraft like that, and with that really, with that really iconic, the late 1980s, early 1990s BA livery.
Yep.
Just for me, I was like, no, that is what a job that you could do. So that had definitely had an impression on a 4 or 5 year old at the time. And then of course, I had grandparents in Scotland, so every 6 months, if I can remember, it was about every 6 months, I used to jump on the flight up to Glasgow, and still one of those things which will remain with me for life is just the impression of a very lightly loaded Boeing 757 just hurtling down the runway, and just to feel power like that. That for me was like the nail in the coffin for me. That's all I wanted to do, was to be able to be in a position where I could, I open the throttles like that. And yeah, so that was pretty much the way I got in my interest for aviation. My grandfather was also in the RAF. He was, an engineer in the RAF, and he was mad about Rolls-Royce engines. So he had all these diagrams and schematics which he would show, and
that's cool.
Also in his house in Scotland, there'll be these beautifully done wall art of Lancasters, Spitfires, Mosquitoes.
Yeah.
So there was always like a way that aviation was installed, probably came through him.
Yep.
And then of course, my mum, then being an Air Force child as well, also heard about as a third party, my grandfather's time, throughout his RAF career, and I also did mention it, on that Facebook page, that in Glasgow at the airport there was this big cutaway of a Rolls-Royce engine, the RB211, and every time that we were there to drop off saying goodbye to the Scottish side of the family, my grandfather would take me aside and basically explain, this is a big fan, that's N1, then, you got the N2 stage, and it runs on, basically all the boring stuff, which, as a, 5, 6 year old, probably means nothing. But I look back on it now, and it's actually probably one of the best early educations of aviation I had. So, but from that regard, that is how it stuck. And, from then on, there was only one thing which I wanted to do, and that was to be a professional pilot.
That's awesome. And, I think of, like you say, as a 5 or 6 year old, it wasn't overly exciting to hear about the fan and the N1 stage and the N2 stage and the combustion chamber and all that kind of thing. But I imagine for your grandfather to be able to share that knowledge with his grandson, it would have been an important moment for him, no doubt.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a shame that he didn't get to see the career. He passed away when I was 16. So, right. But it still makes me smile every now and again by the fact that on the back of the Global there's two big Rolls-Royce engines. Yeah. So yeah, it's again, I think it's almost gone full circle from standing at that airport in Glasgow.
I love it. Now, I suspect you're probably about a decade, maybe more, younger than me if you've got little kids. Was your grandfather in the Second World War?
He was, yes. So, to be honest, right on the spot, I don't know the ins and outs of where he was, but he was in the Second World War, and then he remained in the service until the 60s, I think the 70s as well. I've just got to work out how old my mum is now. She'll be horrified by this. But
Don't say it. No,
I'm definitely not going to. Don't worry. But so definitely would have gone into the 70s.
Yeah, okay. And that's about when my dad got in. So my dad got into the Air Force it was in the late 60s.
Oh, nice.
My grandfather served in the army in the Second World War in Syria. But it's so cool to think that your grandfather, that he was there when the Battle of Britain took place. There were aircraft, there was all the stuff that we see in documentaries, and my equal first favourite movie, The Battle of Britain. He was there, like he was in that area, as was your grandmother.
Absolutely, yeah. I couldn't agree more. And even he used to, tell me that the Spitfire was the best made British aircraft, I should say. So, he had an absolute passion for aviation, and it's funny just talking about it with you right now. It's definitely, without a question or doubt, where I got the bulk of the desire to wanting to pursue aviation from.
That's so cool. You've got such a cool aviation heritage, Alex.
Thank you. Didn't think about it like that, but yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah, no, that's pretty awesome. So your grandfather, maybe deliberately, maybe selfishly, whatever the motive was, or maybe he was just a loving grandfather that wanted to share his passion, which is what I dare say it was. He's primed you, so to speak, to want to pursue a career in aviation. Where'd the start come from? So you mentioned earlier that you moved to Australia as a young fella. Where did that start? Where did you first go on your trial introductory flight? Where did you first solo? All that kind of thing?
So the first trial introductory flight was actually a present for finishing school from a family friend, and by this stage I knew that I was going to be flying. I've also said been very lucky to have, very fortuitous to have parents who've supported it both, financially and also, from a personal point of view.
Yeah.
The early stages. And so the first trial flight was the end of 2005, about December 2005, and we were at Bankstown, a little Piper Warrior, and for me, just going out, sitting in the left-hand seat of that with the instructor, and it was again another reinforcement of, all right, this is what I want to do. And I tell you what, that hour was one of the quickest hours I've ever had. And to come back into Bankstown, knowing that the course for me to start wasn't until that following March in 2006. That was a very, very long summer wait. So I got myself, basically read the Piper Warrior manual, like from front to back, and
all over the BAK as well, I imagine.
Pretty much, getting, I heard that Bob Tate was were the books to have, so made sure I got the BAK and the PPL, and that was a very long wait. Working in cafes and just getting through until the start of flying, and then when I started full time, I was like, right, this is it. Time to give this a good crack and prove to myself that it was the career that I wanted. And my God, it was. I invested in pretty much all my spare energy into it to make sure there was no resits, and to just enjoy it. It did eventually catch up with me. By the end of the training, I did feel exhausted, which probably after 18 months going full time, well, about 15 months full time, I should say, that by the end of it, I felt exhausted, but I had my shiny license in my hand.
So for our non-Antipodean listeners, our school year down here finishes, well, you would have finished grade 12 probably early November.
Correct, yeah.
And so you had a 4-month wait basically over the Christmas season, and like you mentioned, you worked, which obviously would have gone a long way to help funding it. And so when you kicked off in March, you said it was 18 months of learning. Would I be safe in assuming that included your commercial as well?
Yeah, so that was what I get. So private, commercial, you got instructor rating and also multi-engine instrument rating. So basically the
whole
hog.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I was done the very end of July 2007. And then after that, it was wanting to get to the airlines as quickly as possible. So I went over to the UK to go and do the JAR ATPLs, they were then called, the 14 exams. Did those, and then, to be honest, at the end of those, I felt really, really burnt out. So it was back to Sydney just to have a bit of recovery time, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Because it had been, as near as it makes no difference by that stage, nearly two and a half years of just full-time work, full-time in the books and flying. And And this is something which I've learned, especially as I get older, you do need to have a bit of time out away from it, or to be able to have a release away from aviation.
Mm-hmm.
But and so back to Sydney, and then you see where this nicely leads on to. So living where we were in Sydney, very, very close to Rose Bay, and to see all the seaplanes coming in and out. And for those who don't know Rose Bay, when the wind is blowing a certain direction, it's a very, very last minute turn to then come back into the bay to give you enough space to land. And I was watching these, these beavers and everything else going, and that was like the calling card. It just was like, right, I need to get into seaplanes somehow.
Right. So that was where you were headed then. That's interesting. So you've done a commercial, you've done an instructor rating, you've done multi-engine command, which obviously would all serve you later on down the track, but makes complete sense if you were heading for the airlines. To me, it's almost like you've come back for that break, allowed your mind to open up, and then that seaplane operation, flying beavers, maybe that was just getting back to that grassroots flying. Maybe that's what appealed to you.
It's, I think, being away from Australia and also seeing the Australian way, how you have to go out, you have to get hours, you have to go and do, don't want to say grassroots flying because seaplane flying really isn't, but you need
True.
you need to make a name for yourself and also to build up the ranks. There's nothing wrong with it. It's the way they do it in Europe, but for when you can go into the right-hand seat of a 320 or 737 with 250 hours.
Oh my goodness!
It was that. At that stage, I lost the appeal for it. I wanted to go and enjoy some proper flying. I was looking at, do I head up north? Do I go to up to the Northern Territory or the top end of Western Australia? But then it was just one of those moments where I just thought, I really, really do want to get into seaplanes. So then, of course, started the researching of how to get into seaplanes. Now, 200 odd hours, there's very, very few people who would take you, let alone employ you. So the idea was to find an operation who would do the training and then give a bunch of ICAS time, so in command under supervision for those who don't know the aviation terms, but basically that to get to a stage where the insurance companies would potentially look at you, because that was a big unknown. It's, for someone who was so green and so fresh. Now, what I didn't realize is I was stepping into a part of aviation where you had to have, there's 50 hours sitting with someone next to you. So eventually came across an operator on the Gold Coast and they did the training, and then they said that if you are good enough throughout the training, we will invest time into you to get you up to 50 hours. And then he said the magic words, and then he said, if we are good enough and we need someone, then we can put you on a day or two a week, which then might lead to 2 or 3 days a week. Mm-hmm. And I thought, right, this is my opportunity to be able to try and prove my worth. So packed the car, left Sydney early 2009, went up to the Gold Coast, did my training up there, got through the training and just fell in love with seaplane flying. Just thought, this is fantastic, because it's not just on and off a runway. You're reading the water, you're reading the weather conditions a lot more. Even though it is day VFR flying, there is a lot more thought that goes into it than just runway to runway.
Boats on the water.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Boats on the water, jet skis who want to race you, the whole lot.
What were you flying at the Goldie?
So started off and I did my training on the 185. Okay. And unfortunately, without getting ahead of myself, unfortunately, that aircraft was involved in a flip, and then that was replaced with the 206. So they were both two very good machines to learn the craft of seaplane flying on.
Right. So you learnt at the Gold Coast. Where were you flying out of at the Gold Coast? Just somewhere on the Broadwater? So
the aircraft was actually based in Coomera. So we used the back waterways there. So we used to tow it into the water every morning. And then so we operated out of SeaWorld as well as the
Ah,
day resort, the day resorts on South Stradbroke Island, and also there was another resort there called Coran Cove. So we operated out of there. And I still remember my first actual day where I got released and being a paid pilot.
yeah.
I had to do a transfer from SeaWorld up to well, as near as makes no difference, Brisbane Airport, but we couldn't land right on the airport because of the straight flight. So we went over the bridge and landed just on the very, very start of the river there, and then they had a chauffeur car waiting. So that was an amazing way to start, my first paid day of flying seaplanes.
That's so cool. And it was an earlier guest, Josh Volani, who's now flying A321 over in Las Vegas. He did the whole, he did the NT, he did Cairns, and then he ended up flying freight out of Bankstown.
Yep.
Before he went over to the US and started flying for the airlines. And he said in our conversation that, he's had conversations with other airline pilots, young guys like himself, and they'll just be sharing experiences. And he's talking about flying over the Great Barrier Reef and, outback Australia when it was stormy and the runway was flooded and all this kind of stuff. And they've never had that because they basically they went from training into the airlines, like through a cadetship or whatever it might have been. And the advice he gave was, especially for new pilots, go and get the experience. Sure, flying in an airline is amazing, and the money's very good, but you're not going to get those experiences. And when you said that, I just thought of Josh, and I thought, if you'd kept going down the path you were heading in the UK, you wouldn't have had that landing over the Gateway Bridge to drop someone off to go and for a connecting flight at Brisbane Airport. It just would never would have happened. It's an amazing story.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the stage where I'm very, very happy flying the jets, but the seaplane flying, it really, really taught me how to fly stick and rudder. And it's a most amazing way where, for those who potentially are interested, you can make a semi-decent career and living out of it. I mean, of course, it's not going to be airline level style of wage or corporate style worth of wage, but it's a fantastic way to basically have that, as silly as it sounds, that raw motor flying skill, because it is all about stick and rudder. And from what I hear, I've never flown a tail dragger, but seaplane flying is quite akin to tail dragger, both takeoff and landing, and then you've got to remember that you've got the floats dangling beneath you, so you need to be very on the ball until you get to an aircraft like a Caravan that's got the yaw damper in it.
Interesting. Seaplane on the same kind of vein where you're dancing on the pedals.
Yeah, that's a takeoff, especially with the Caravan on the water, because you got so much power from the engine. Yeah. It's just you are dancing on the rudder pedals on the takeoff run. It's just sorry, listeners, I haven't flown floats for 10 years, so if I'm wrong with this, then I apologise. But the Beaver was exactly the same, because you've got 400 odd horsepower from a big radial engine that just wants to twist you, and then you're dealing with the components of the waterway as well, and it is. I still maintain, for those who want to go and try something different, yes, it's not cheap, but a seaplane rating is some of the most fun flying you'll have. So
where to from the Gold Coast? You obviously you racked up a number of hours with this firm. You headed further up north? So by this stage, I've done a few trips back to Sydney. My parents are still there, and with Sydney Seaplanes just being on the doorstep, had stuck my head in a few times and started to annoy the then chief pilots by saying, I'm here, I'm available if you ever need me. This was the company back in Rose Bay?
Yes, in Rose Bay, yeah.
Right.
But he gave my number to the chief pilot of Seaplanes on Hamilton Island. So it was a joint helicopter and seaplane company. So one afternoon, just taxiing out in the Broadwater, get a call from a number I don't know. So slightly skeptical. I thought I'll answer it, and ends up being the chief pilot from Hamilton Island. And we just had a chat, and he said, "I've got your number and your CV from Sydney Seaplanes. Would you be interested in potentially coming up to have an interview?" And so we spoke about what the operation was. The company there had just taken over the tender from the previous outfit on Hamilton Island. They had just gone in with a complete. Basically, they gutted the old operation. They brought, completely redid it, made sure that they had, top class machines. They just bought a, in inverted commas, new Beaver over from the US. They completely refurbished, not an inch of corrosion in it. So, of course, my ears then lit up and went, okay, this is a way to get up the seaplane ladder. So, got back home that night, and my then girlfriend, she could tell that she was slightly skeptical. She didn't want to head up north, but then from my point of view, and this is in the early days, to move up the ladder, you need to be selfish, and said, look, I think I need to go up for the interview. Went up for the interview to Hamilton Island and really fell in love with where they're operating from, the trips out to. They weren't landing at the reef at that stage, but they were going to Whitehaven Beach. And it was also the first time I saw a caravan on floats. And even though I was not trained in it, the chief pilot said, look, just come out in the caravan, sit in the front, let me know what you think, and we'll have a chat. So took me out for a flight, went over to Whitehaven. So now in a caravan, and here it was, this mythical beast, the turbine powered air conditioned seaplane, which was just, I was falling in love with it.
I can relate.
Yep. And then we just got talking, and it was one of those days, just the perfect seaplane day. So about 5 to 10 knots worth of breeze. There was no issue at the beach, and just the way he made this caravan pull up at Whitehaven Beach, jump out, turn around, unload everyone. They had a beach host, so basically push the plane off, throw the anchor out, and just we spoke for an hour and a half about the operation. And by this stage, I was already sold. Just had to have a quick interview with the general manager, and spoke to the general manager. And he said, well, when can you start? So that was how I got into Hamilton Island Air.
So initially, were you flying the Beaver up there, or did they quickly get you onto the caravan?
No. So definitely it was, because at this stage I only had about 500 hours. So again, very, very, still quite green, and still green in the industry, but also green in seaplane land.
Right.
But again, they took a chance on this, up and coming cocky idiot who I'm referring to as myself at that stage, and the aircraft arrived on the Gold Coast, got put together on the Gold Coast, and as soon as the paperwork was done and it went on the VH register, we flew back down from Hamilton Island to go and pick it up, and we flew all the way up the coast to Hamilton Island, and that was the start of the start of flying the big machines, we want to call it that. And so I was absolutely in love with that aircraft. It's still VH ZDA, so Zilla Delta Alpha, to this day is still my favorite piston aircraft I've ever flown. There was just something about it. It was an old machine. I think it was 1954, if I remember.
Yeah, right.
But it was just absolutely stunning. Everything inside was just, it was refurbished to basically show spec. In fact, it was a show aircraft with a float manufacturer and whip line, and it showed inside, and it just, it was a beautiful aircraft to look at and amazing to fly. There was just something about that aircraft. It felt, compared to other amphib Beavers I flew, it felt like it had another 100 horsepower. It just flew exactly as you wanted it to. Absolutely gorgeous machine. I mean, I could speak for an hour based on just how good ZDA was. Yeah. I'm sure it bore a few people, but it was a magic aircraft.
Wouldn't bore me. I'd almost completed my commercial beginning of October 2010. That's where I was in my journey at that time. When you were in Seaplanes, I was plugging around in a 182 out of Toowoomba.
Nothing wrong with that.
Oh, no, I loved it. And I loved that airframe, Mike Sierra Tango. Had its own idiosyncrasies that you had to deal with. But you learn that, you put enough hours in an aeroplane and you learn its character and you learn, and this isn't for you because you know this, but it's for the listeners that maybe haven't had that experience. You learn what she's like and what she likes and what she doesn't like and how to fly her. And it sounds like you had that relationship with Zulu Delta Alpha.
Oh, 100%. And so to kind of keep the journey going at this stage. So by this time, there was a glass cockpit caravan which was coming. As I just said, there was no expense spared with the machinery. They wanted to be one of the best tour operators in the country, and it showed with how the aircraft were presented, how the reception was. It was a really good place to work. I know some people didn't get on with the general manager, but he was very firm but fair. And he's one of those people who, I'm forever grateful for, which I'll get to in a minute. But what happened is that the then girlfriend was not happy living on Hamilton Island. So I thought, oh, well, she followed me there. There's a job coming up in Cairns. So went further north to Cairns and flew there for a year, flew another Amphib Beaver and a straight float. And for the first 6 months, it was a pretty decent job, but the management up there, they did destroy a perfectly good company. And by the end of that, me and the chief pilot, who also came from the Whitsundays, he worked for Air Whitsunday at the time. So we kind of went up together, then we kind of came back down together. Right. But we both started to just see what was going on in the seaplane world. And ironically, so Hamilton Island Air and also Air Whitsunday were both after seaplane pilots. So I rang the new chief pilot of Seaplanes who was there when I first started. He was one of the line guys, and we had a really, really good relationship. Yeah. In fact, still do. And I said, look, if you want me to come back, I'll come back. Kind of tail between my legs, knew that I don't want to say made the wrong decision, but knew it probably wasn't the best decision to go up to Cairns. And so anyway, then I get a call from the general manager a day later, and he goes, oh, Alex, I hear you want to come back. I was like, yes, I do. He goes, well, let me have a think about it. And, basically what do you want out of, what do you want out of the company? I said, I want to go back and enjoy work. And I do want to get on the caravan. There's no two ways about it. So the following morning at about 8:30, he rings me up and says, when can you start again? Oh, wow. So that's why I just said, forever grateful for Hamilton Island Air. And if I trace everything back to where I am now, I've said this before, it was going back to Hamilton Island Air, which positioned me to where I am today. So forever grateful of being able to go back to that company.
And it goes without saying, I think, Alex, and, for the listeners, Alex and I have only ever spoken for the last 45 or so minutes, so I don't really know him from before that. For them to take you back meant that you had to have been a good pilot, you had to have been a good operator, you had to have been good with the customers, all of those things. Otherwise, they would have said no.
I am one who, I'm very open and honest, probably does my wife's head in, but I'm very difficult to take praise, but I'll take that and say thank you to that. There was definitely a reason why I was allowed to go back. Because we know what aviation is like. It is such a small industry. Yeah. And again, just, if someone looks after you, then look after them back. It's as simple as that. And yeah, that second stint on Hamilton Island was such a blast. We had such a good team. And I've written this in my little blurb as well, that the first day back, even though I knew where everything was and all the aircraft were, there were a few people who, well, in fact, a lot of people who were still there from my first stint, and so the tail was between the legs, a bit sheepish looking around, and the seaplane chief pilot came over, gave me a great big man hug, and basically said, "Welcome back. Let's get back to work."
Nice.
So that day we went back up in ZDA, and it was like putting back on a glove. Just knew exactly how to fly, and got the line check out of the way, and then 18 months later it was time for the next move. But in between that time, they got the caravan racing, and man, just absolutely fell in love with just operating to have the glass cockpit caravan, which was 2010 model, I think. It could have been a 9, but anyway, it was one of the first G1000s in Australia. And the contrast to be able to fly a Beaver made in 1954 to then go into a G1000 cockpit caravan, which had the 3-axis autopilot, air conditioning.
Yeah,
there's very few operations like that within Australia, or probably even looking out the window at the seaplanes here, they've got a few Twin Otters, but besides that, there's very few places where you could probably have the ability to have such a diverse range of machines that you can fly in the same day. So it was very, very rare to fly both in the same day, but we had to be able to if we could.
Yeah.
And that was just an amazing. It was a really amazing time in my life. Flying was great. Met my now wife there as well. So just so many positives came out from being on Hamilton Island the second time. So yeah, it was an absolute joy.
Sounds like you were meant to be there.
Of course, I'm one of these believers that everything happens for a reason. So, yep.
And so, I mean, my caravan endorsement was at Redcliffe Airport, just northwest of Brisbane Airport, on wheels, off a tarmac. Yours, I'm assuming, was the float plane.
Yeah, so that was definitely interesting. So, I mean, how, well, from experience, how nice the caravan is to fly.
Mm-hmm.
I've never ever flown a caravan on wheels. I've only flown them on amphibs. So for those who are not familiar with how amphibs work, there's no nose wheel steering. It's all free castering. So you're using differential braking.
Wow.
And I still remember the caravan, 675 horsepower from it.
Yeah.
It just wants to move to the left all the time. And also being a turbine, you got ever so slight delay. It's not as much as what I'm flying now, but it really taught you to think ahead with just moving it on the tarmac. But then we go back to the stick and rudder element. For the first 10 hours of flying it, I likened it to a 675 horsepower shopping trolley because that's how that's how it felt trying to taxi it around
with brakes at the back. Yeah,
right. Exactly. Yeah. Now eventually, you do get a feel for it, and but yeah, the first 10 hours it was a real eye opener, especially to have the performance as well. I joke about it for the global. If we're climbing from 410 to 450 when we're relatively light, we get better rate of climb than the Beaver does at sea level. So, so to have that, and then imagine to go from the Beaver to the caravan, and the caravan was doing 1,500 feet a minute with a heavy load.
Yeah,
it was an eye opener. So. But I honestly adored it. It was such a privilege to be able to fly that machine for that company with the bunch of guys I was working for.
I can imagine. She's definitely my favourite aircraft. Every listener knows that because I only say it every episode.
Nothing wrong with that. Honestly, it's probably the aircraft I miss most because it's big enough to feel like it's a serious bit of kit, but small enough that you can still throw around. And there's very few aircraft, I think, that do that balance so well.
Yes. My experience in the van's very different to yours in me doing what I was doing, but I just love the aircraft, so capable. And I just harp back to that chat I had with Josh as well. He was flying the caravan in Western New South Wales doing the freight runs feeding into toll, and I remember him saying, sharing an experience that he had going through some pretty severe turbulence, and he just said, I wouldn't want to do it in any other plane. Incredibly capable plane.
He put floats on it, or it can be an airliner, or it can be a freighter. It is a true Swiss Army knife of an aircraft. It's one of those aircraft where it truly is, if it ain't broke, why fix it? It's, again, funny talking to someone about who's flown the Caravan. It's definitely the aircraft I miss most. Not my favorite aircraft I've flown, because now, we'll get onto it in a little bit with the Falcon and the Global. But in fact, I do miss flying the Caravan more than the 7X.
Wow.
Funnily enough.
So Hamilton Island, you've done the second round there. What came after that? And I guess what led you to leave such an awesome operation? I shouldn't say leave. I should say move on.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. So I was not actively looking, but at this stage, Sydney Seaplanes were then branching out to help some operations overseas, because Sydney Seaplanes are a good seaplane operator, and their training is exceptionally good as well within the Australian landscape.
Right.
So by this time, got well over 1,000 hours on seaplanes, mixture of beaver and caravan time, and coming up to, must have been about the 1,500 hour mark. So yeah, probably about 1,200 hours on floats, when get another one of those calls, just answer it, and it's Sydney Seaplanes asking if I want to go overseas to go and fly a Caravan EX. So basically the big body Caravan with a bigger engine on floats for a private businessman who had just purchased it. And the idea was that it was to complement his King Air, which he already had, but he loved being around the water. He had a resort on a private island in the Philippines, and also a fairly sizable motor yacht as well. So for him, he wanted to see how the Caravan could fit into basically his life away from work, so his private life, and so got given the rundown of what I just told you. And by this stage, I kind of felt like I'd done all I could in Australia with seaplanes, because I'd also had a 2-week stint flying for Sydney Seaplanes, as they were short-staffed and I was coming on leave, so I was able to go down and fly around Sydney. So I really felt like I had done all I could without flying the mallards up in Darwin.
Yeah.
But this opportunity came up, and spoke to the now wife about it. We thought, we're in our mid-20s, let's go over and have an adventure. So we agreed to it, went over to get a US license based on my Australian one, so a validation with all my seaplane stuff, and then had to go back down to Camden to go and do single-engine instrument racing again, because I hadn't flown an instrument for a long, long time. You don't need to as a seaplane pilot.
Yeah.
So got all set up with that, and that led to moving to Asia, which was 2013. So yeah, that was the start of flying overseas, and that was in another world. So the aircraft was based in Subic Bay. So Subic Bay is the old US naval base, which got turned into a free port zone. So it wasn't the real Philippines. And what I mean by that is that's a lot more protected. It's a lot cleaner. It's a lot, I don't mean this in a horrible way, but it's a lot safer as an expat than to be right in the heart of Manila.
Right.
But there was also a private jet base there. So they had a few aircraft. And it was what I didn't realize going over there, because I just thought it'll be for a couple of years and I've got to reassess what I need to do after that.
Yeah.
But it gave me an insight into how business aviation works. So went over there, got started, and met the owner for the first time. I met his representative in Sydney and got a really good vibe from it about, how the aircraft was to be flown and what we were to do.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, no, it was 2014, because I was off to the simulator the following year, which was 15. So went over there and just, again, flying-wise, had just an absolute blast. And to be able to go from the short body, I don't want to say low power caravan, but the 675 horsepower caravan to the EX with a bigger engine, it was just such a nice step up in seaplane land. And it was operating it, fully IFR, in and out of Manila Airport, which was always good fun. Like your number two behind a 320 and you've got a 330 behind you. So
keep it up.
Exactly. There's a few times when we got asked, what's the maximum speed you can do? Okay. But the flying around there, again, just what an amazing experience, which, for someone who was at the time 24, just wow. It was, flying just the most beautiful islands and some of the approaches and some of the scenery, which I'm just so glad to have seen and to experience, and to work as a foreigner with some of the local Filipinos. It was just one of the greatest experiences I could ask for at that stage of my career. It was a very, very enjoyable job, one which I kind of, don't want to say kind of wish, but wish it would have gone on a bit longer. Right. But the single biggest flaw with that aircraft was that it was heavy, and it wasn't the owner. It was someone, I think it was a Cessna representative or someone else who basically sold the owner, the world, and the aircraft was not capable of doing everything that he wanted to do. Right. So it was very heavy, and obviously that took into our fuel load. So down at the islands, we had to, at great expense of the owner, he had to then transport Jet A1 down to the islands, because if we went there, we were only one way, so we could not get back to Manila or could not get back to Subic, just because of how heavy this aircraft was. Right. So, a caravan, and then it's got the VIP interior in it, which then had its own lav down the back and a small galley up the front, and it had a fixed bulkhead between the cockpit and the cabin, and then you got floats on top.
Yeah, a lot of weight.
It was very, very heavy for a seaplane, and seaplanes, you need them to be lighter than or as light as possible, I should say, because you do have a lot of mass dangling underneath you, and that does go into your fuel load as well. So that was definitely a negative to the owner, whereas the King Air could carry fuel, land on the strip down there, and go all the way back to Manila, whereas we were one way. So, of course, shipping Jet A1 into an island which doesn't have it does start to add up cost-wise. Yeah. The other issue as well is that the prevailing winds in the Philippines in their winter are very, very strong easterlies. So that ruled out landing on the water because it was just far too rough, because there was no protection. But what it also meant is that we didn't have the liberty of being able to even use the runway, because it was outside the crosswind limits of the aircraft. So again, he was told that the aircraft could do it, but that was the numbers for it on as a land plane and not as a seaplane. So right. There was a few days when just ringing the airport manager, just asking what the wind was, and then to have to ring the boss and say that I'm sorry, I can't get the aircraft down there when in conditions like that. So he understood, and safety always comes first. But we started to hear rumours of the fact that he wasn't happy with the caravan, he wasn't happy with the salesman he had, and was looking at offloading it. Unfortunately, those rumours did come true, and I was offered a job to go back to Sydney Seaplanes. But during this time, the single biggest luckiest break in my career. So the Falcon was coming down. Now, I had no idea or who the captain was, where it flew. All I got told was that there was a Falcon coming down.
Was this owned by the same guy?
No. This is just to be parked at Subic Bay.
Oh, okay.
So during this time, I also became really good friends with the Global Express captain there, and to this day, we're still fantastic friends. And he was one of those mentors who, just right place, right time. Just we got into a really good relationship, and he was quite high up with one of the Hong Kong management companies. So he knew the aircraft was coming down, and we had a chat one night, and he said, they've just lost their first officer. I'm like, okay. So didn't think much of it. And he said, in all honesty, you should just tell the captain that you're available. And I kind of laughed and I said, I've got no multi-engine time besides from my multi-engine IR. And I've been flying seaplanes for the past, 5-6 years. So, I've got no real world experience. So my mentor, I should call him that for the time being, just said, you never know. So the aircraft landed, came into Subic, and then we all got together at the local expat bar, all sat around the table. I introduced myself to him. We got talking, and then at the end of the night, we got asked by my mentor, I was like, did you tell him you're available? I said, no, I did not feel like the time was right. He said, right, send an email tomorrow. This is his email. So I sent an email, and then he said, Alex, thank you for your interest. Yes, I am going to be looking for a first officer, and I will definitely, consider you.
Cool.
So this is where all the stars align. So there was the slightest hope that, my next job was going to be flying a Falcon. So we said no to the sure thing of going back to Sydney Seaplanes, and we hedged our bets that this would come off. Now, of course, there was no guarantee, but somehow deep down, it had to happen for me. So eventually, after what seemed an eternity, I think it was about 2 or 3 months worth of wait and no income and just waiting to hear if something was going to happen. Eventually get the call from the captain and said, would you like a job on the 7X? To which...
Hang on, let me think about this.
Yeah. To which I think was the fastest 2-second thought process I ever had. It was like, yes. So he said, well, congratulations, we'll sort out a contract. He said, I need you to get back down to Sydney ASAP to go and do your multi-engine instrument rating, because the aircraft was VP. So VPC cells came in registered so I could fly it on my Australian license, provided that everything was up to speed. So had to rush back down to Sydney for 72 hours, jump back in the Baronet to Camden Aviation, and basically had to remember how to fly a multi-engine after a long time, and passed that and went back up to the Philippines, signed the contract, and the following month, which was August, I was off to Dubai to start my 7X type rating.
Holy cow.
Yeah. I've first to admit, I've been ever so fortuitous in my career. So the things like this don't happen that often. And, I know I am a lucky so-and-so for how it ended up like that.
Right place, right time.
Exactly.
But, there was another chap that came on, an American guy. He was an ex-deputy sheriff. Doug Wolf is his name.
Yep.
And he was flying a caravan for a FedEx feeder. And he was talking, towards the end of our chat, he was talking about just that, being open, talking to people, making friends. Everywhere he'd land, he'd go into the FBO and meet whoever he could. And, this chap, I think he's in his 50s from memory, maybe mid-50s. So he came to the game late, and he wouldn't talk about it he couldn't talk about it at the time in the interview, because he had basically a couple of sticks in the fire, and he'd met this young girl who was flying a BizJet at some airport, and got talking with her, and turns out she was flying for U-Haul Aviation, the owners of U-Haul.
Oh, wow.
So, I recorded the episode. He didn't let on to me, he wouldn't tell me even off the mic.
Yeah.
About who the opportunity was with and whatnot. But he just said, he's got an opportunity, potentially flying a PC-12. Anyway, long story short, about a week after we recorded that episode, so I hadn't even edited it yet, he pops a photo up. He'd just been for a fly in this PC-12, and you couldn't tell it was U-Haul's because it isn't sign written, but the rego, you can look it up and you could see that it was owned by U-Haul. And I said to him, are you ready to haul? And he just gave me a big thumbs up. And I thought, okay, that was his opportunity. And so now he's flying this PC-12. But because he was open, he was genuine, he was talking to people he had to talk to. Well, he would talk to whoever he could talk to, and put himself out there on a limb, which sounds similar to what you did.
Of course, and it's one of the big things which I've had asked behind the scenes is how to get into business aviation. And again, I keep on saying the same thing. Rightly or wrongly, it is a bit of a club because it is quite difficult to get into. But once you're in, you're in. As long as you've got a good name for yourself and keep your nose clean.
Yeah.
But in order to get in, it's just exactly that. If you're at an FBO or if you see an aircraft, which is what I used to do on Hamilton Island, if you see an aircraft with its door open, go and say hello. 9 times out of 10, the pilots will invite you up. If someone came up to me and said, "Can I have a look inside?" Then, yeah, absolutely. It's such an important part of the process for anyone who does want to fly corporate is just to show that you're out there and show that you're keen.
Yeah. And that is an amazing story if you think about it on the surface, that you've flown, apart from your IFR rating, you hadn't flown twins.
No, none whatsoever. So I was going from literally overnight, went from a single engine turbine to a trijet.
Yeah. A very, very slick trijet.
It was. And, I still remember being in Dubai on the initial training, and again, just so fortuitous. We had 2 ex-Dassault engineers there who were doing the training, and they were able to break the systems down into even the simplest ways that I could understand. Because, I'd never been through a type rating before. I had no idea what I was in for. And boy, was I in for a shock. It was 4 intense weeks of just the fire hose analogy. They're just cramming so much information into you, and somehow you're expected to keep 95% of it in order to pass the type rating, or the ground score at least, and then you go into the sim. And I still remember, because I was doing it under the EASA format at the time for the validation onto my Australian license, and there was a time where part of it was flying a raw data ILS, which done plenty of time in the twins and doing training, and done it a couple of months ago back down at Bankstown. But for some reason, just my eyes and my hands and my feet were not coming together to be able to just do this one simple aspect. And just remember just getting so frustrated at myself with something which I should be able to do. And I still remember the instructor in the sim pausing the sim, and he was a lovely guy. Just said, "Right, stop overthinking it. Fly it like you're going to be flying your caravan." So then we reset, went back up to, fly or 6 mile final, whenever it was. And then it was a bit wobbly. And he goes, "See, you can do it, but just to prove it's not a fluke, let's do it again." So another deep breath, motion off, so sim off pause, and just something like that clicked. So, I don't proclaim to be the world's best pilot, never will. But if you just believe in yourself, also got a solid foundation, and don't come across as an a-hole, you will have people who will look after you and want you to succeed.
Yes, that is very apparent with these discussions that I'm having with pilots at all levels, is how I think when you're outside of the aviation space, and to be honest, even when you're inside it, but early on in the piece, you have that feeling of potentially of imposter syndrome, and no one will talk to me. But like you mentioned before, if the door was open on the aeroplane at Hemo, you'd go up and knock on the door and say, "Hey, can I have a look? Can we have a chat?" And this podcast is proof to it. The pilots love talking about aviation.
Of course.
And helping each other out.
Yeah, absolutely. But as a little slight caveat to that, every now and again, as long as you're prepared to come across that one grumpy captain or that one person having a bad day, just don't let that bring you down, because 99% of the industry are good guys.
Yeah. So where were you based? You were based out of Hong Kong flying the Falcon?
The aircraft had a Chinese owner, but because Hong Kong had become so slot restrictive and was so expensive, the Falcon was kept in Subic. So that was probably one of those things which helped me get the job, was the fact that I was already living there. They didn't have to pay for anyone to move.
Right.
They already had the visa set up. So that was definitely on my side. So the aircraft was hangared in Subic Bay, but it was owned by a Chinese businessman.
Okay. And how long were you in that airframe?
flew that for just under 2 years, and unfortunately then got wind of the fact that the aircraft was potentially going to be sold. There's no guarantee, but there were a few uncomfortable mumblings around. So by this stage, and I'd spoken to the captain about it as well, that the level of experience I had, it would be very hard for me to go anywhere else apart from stay in Asia. So he did help me and looked at a few jobs around. Got there's a few offers that came through, but I eventually ended up taking one for an aircraft which was supposed to be Hong Kong based as a rotation job. And rotation really appealed to me at that stage because we had child number one on the way. It meant that we could be based back in inverted commas the real world, but also still being able to fly these magnificent machines and having some good quality time off from it as well.
Yeah.
So agreed, signed a contract for this job, but then the owner had invested into a casino in the Bahamas. So the aircraft was then to make its way over to become an asset for the casino. So still doing rotation, but we then went over to fly it in the aircraft was hangared in Fort Lauderdale in West Palm Beach.
Right.
So there was a Dassault service center there, so they managed to get parking for it. And yeah, so it was my shortest job I've ever had, but it was again just such a blast by the fact that we were operating for the casino, flying all over the eastern seaboard of the US, up to New York, into JFK.
Wow.
All these amazing airports, which we all want to experience one way or another someday. So
yeah.
Into JFK, we had gone over to San Francisco and done the visual approach by the bay. I've been into the Napa Valley. It was, and I put this down in writing as well, that it was actually a really nice experience to be out of Asia for a bit and just to deal with the US ATC.
Yeah.
Now, the American ATC, in my opinion, is some of the best in the world. They are absolutely brilliant, and they're there to help you rather than make your life difficult, unlike some ATCs I've experienced. So in that regard, it was more learning how to fly in the US. There was a lot more, if you can see the airport, you're cleared for a visual approach, which was going back to looking outside the aircraft again rather than having to basically follow the flight director.
Yeah.
So 7 months worth of work. It was all over far too quickly, but it was a fantastic place to be for 7 months, to be able to to get to learn the US, to enjoy the flying. Had a really, really good captain as well, or two very good captains, I should say, because it was rotation. But there was one who I just clicked with, and he would throw me in the deep end, weather right down to minimums and decent crosswinds, and just to become a lot more comfortable with flying the Falcon.
Yeah.
Outside of China and outside of all that area, into a very fast-paced environment.
Yeah, wow. Owned by the casino. So you were assumedly moving wealthy Americans around the country. Yeah,
wealthy high rollers. And it was, again, another insight into a world which don't want to be part of, but it was very enjoyable sometimes to see how they would go about their day-to-day affairs when they were being flown for free by the casino to then come in, and they were expected to spend money.
Yeah, right. So what came after being stationed in the States then?
So by this stage, the casino were realizing how much a long-haul 3-engine business jet was costing, shuttling people from Miami to the Bahamas. So a 45-minute hop is not what these aircraft are designed to do.
Yeah.
So an aircraft broker in the US involved, and he basically said, we can charter the aircraft, but of course the current crew can't stay because they're not green card holders, and it's going to be predominantly US mainland based. So we got given our notice, and again, just fell into my lap that someone who I'd met prior had just resigned from another rotation job based back in China. He was going to EasyJet back in Europe.
Yeah.
And he said, would you like my old job? And just perfect timing. It was literally finishing off one job. I then had 7 weeks back in Auckland when my first child was born. So it was great to be in dad mode for that.
Yep.
So said yes. I got asked if I was interested, and I said yes. So then I got flown over to Luxembourg to go and do a sim assessment and do the interview. And I kind of went in there knowing that it was my job to lose, because there were so few, at that stage, there were very few 7X first officers readily available in the market who were prepared to do a rotation job in and out of China.
Right.
So I still went in there, trying to be as professional as I could. And the first day turned up and they said, right, well, here's your iPad for work. I'm like, well, this is a good sign. So did a sim check and met the CEO of the management company and got the green light. And then I asked the question, can I start in 3 weeks' time to coincide with the rotation? And they said, unfortunately, you need to be in China by the end of the week. So flew back to New Zealand, said, yeah, I got the job, saw my baby girl, and then jumped on an aircraft 3 days later back up to China, and then did the first 3 weeks of my work over there.
Wow.
Again, right place, right time, but also very, very fortuitous with my career to date.
Yeah, but I'm going to come back to it, Alex, and say it. For that associate that had resigned to suggest and recommend, obviously you'd earned your stripes. You had to.
Of course, I never really thought about it like that either. So yeah, I guess you are right, even though we were both first officers. But we hit it off right away from day one. So definitely, again, it comes back to just be yourself in the industry.
Yeah, and do your best.
Yeah.
And so where was that stationed? You said, so it was out of China?
Yep, so the aircraft was mainly Shanghai based. So first 3 weeks I was there, we went down to Da Nang in Vietnam and over to LA, and I thought, this is pretty good flying. But then that was my last one and only long haul trip I did that year. So that was 2018.
Yeah.
The rest of it was up and down the corridor from Shanghai to Beijing. And there was a few trips down to Macau, to the casino down there. And there was another one to the islands, but that was the bulk of the flying.
Yeah, okay.
Now, during this time, I was offered a potential to go and move to Japan to go and fly Global Express for a company over there. By this stage, rotation was starting to wear a bit thin, because on paper, it's a fantastic job. You work half the year and you got half the year off. But what they don't tell you is that, you are missing big chunks of your family life, especially when you do have young children. And that, for me, was one of the hardest things.
Right.
So my wife, she's been fantastic through my whole career as long as we've been together. And we had to do a lot of adulting, deciding what was the right thing to do. Eventually, we decided to take the offer. Now, I know that some people might seem it to be almost career suicide to leave a job within a year, which was a very good, stable, solid job. But, from the personal point of view, I was down to the stage where I was up to senior first officer in the ranks. So we were up there, but there was no future if I stayed there to be able to get my command, because they were very, very rarely did they promote from within. Again, rightly or wrongly, that was just their company ethos.
Yeah.
Now, I still probably had another year or two worth of solid flying before I could look at command properly, but it was something which also came into my head. So we did a lot of adulting. We decided that, yes, we'll give Japan a go. It was only supposed to be for a couple of years, but to get some global time and to see what came out of it. So I said goodbye to the Falcon. My final flight was 2018, and it would have been in October 2018. So that was the last time I flew the Falcon. But I had one more rotation after that. So I then went back to New Zealand, had 3 weeks there, and then had my final 3 weeks worth of work. And in that final 3 weeks of work, for me, it emphasized I'd made the right decision as well, because we did not fly at all once. So it highlighted for me that it was definitely a time to move on.
Yep.
And then the following February, after having Christmas in New York, and then I was off to go and do my Global Express type rating in Montreal in the January. So got that out of the way, and then we moved to Tokyo mid-February 2019.
Yeah, and you're still flying for the same company now?
So the 6500, so I'm still affiliated with the same management company, but we ended up being taken on by an owner direct. During COVID, we were working hard and we didn't have a quality of life. And to cut a long story short, we were thinking about leaving. In fact, we were going to leave Japan, but the owner, well, my favorite owner, because we were operating as a pilot pool, he found out that I was due to leave, and eventually we had a chat, and he said that he wanted to have his own crew. He wanted his own crew from day one, and this would be the time to do it.
That's cool. That's so cool. And so is that what led to a captaincy in the 6500, or had that already come?
No, so I got my command at the start of last year. So again, I was very, very lucky by the fact that I was able to use that absolute busy, crazy period of when the US opened up and we were doing a lot of charters from Asia to the US. So it was a perfect time for me to come out of COVID after not having flown a lot and to go full on for my command. Now, again, to put a lot of pressure on the home life, and forever grateful for the better half for putting up with it. It was very trying on her as well, especially as we had number two. By this stage, Australia and New Zealand had not quite opened up, so we hadn't been home for 2 years.
Yeah.
So the mental toll was taking it out of both of us, but the command was like the one big push we had to get through, and we got through it. And yeah, it was a very, very proud, happy to say, quite an emotional day getting 4 stripes on, especially on something as amazing as a global.
100%.
And to then later down the line to know, and again, you're a very good interviewer, because now I'm thinking about this, to then have the appreciation of the owner to want to have us direct, it just emphasised how good the industry was if you kept a name for yourself.
Yes. I think it speaks volumes, Alex, the fact that he wanted to do that and he wanted you as part of the crew. So 5 years roughly under your belt on the 6500 now, you've got a command, you're flying all over the world. I know you don't have a crystal ball. Where do you go to from here other than being an astronaut?
To be honest, that is the unknown question. At this stage, I am very content with the job I have.
I wonder why.
Yeah. Yeah, I am very, very content with the job I have. To be honest, I think in the long run, eventually, when my time on jets is finished, I'd like to come back to Australia or New Zealand to be able to fly King Air or something, and to not have to do the long haul.
Yeah,
but it's a while away for me at least, because the job I have right now is second to none.
Oh, and that's why I was sitting here thinking, what the heck would you do from here? But I think
exactly,
you're bang on. It'll be that later life, coming into semi-retirement. So we're talking a lot of years for you yet.
Exactly, and it's I'm again, it comes back to being very fortuitous to be my age. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing to be in this position with a relatively young family, and to enjoy aviation, to also know that we can still go and do things later on in life as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you've mentioned your wife a number of times. In being in the aviation world, even with my stint in aviation, I know how difficult it is on those who stay home, and especially with young kids. So you obviously are married to an amazing woman.
Absolutely.
And it can be quite easily overlooked, and we think, oh, this is all Alex's journey, but it's not. Your wife has the journey, and your wife has the stories as well.
I do maintain that they are the unsung heroes of aviation, because you see a lot of marriages that do break up through it. But if someone is who they are behind the scenes, I should say, and they don't get the same credit as everyone else, but in all honesty, they do deserve the same, if not more credit than us, just because they're the ones who got to stay at home, or they, in my case, is overseas, away from her family. But the way it ends up is that if we play our cards for the long term, then we're in a very, very good spot.
Yeah. Very good. Before I roll into the final set of questions, is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
I'm glad that it's gone on record for especially the next generation of pilots to hear. Yeah, if for anyone who does want to get into corporate, just keep your nose clean and go and talk to people. It's really all I can say.
So I shoot these questions at everyone that comes on the podcast. Can you tell us about a memorable experience you've had flying a particular aircraft and what made it special to you?
I think going back to the caravan, we were talking about flying around the Philippines, just perfect glass out conditions, amazing colours, and just to be able to fly around some islands. We weren't landing there, but just to see some islands that people in their lifetime would never really get to see. And this was my work. It was one of those pinch yourself moments where, to be able to go from flying, on the airways IFR to then drop down and around the islands, that for me is a memory which will last forever.
100%. So different to flying the 6500. I mean, completely different flying, but...
Oh, it is.
Yeah, wow. What's one of your most fear-filled flight experiences?
Again, in a caravan, picking up ice in the Philippines and seeing ice start to accumulate on the floats, and just one of those awful IMC days. It was, for my first big IFR job, and it was the initial panic of seeing the struts pick up the ice, but then to know, right, we can. I had options available. I knew where the base was, but also that the tops weren't too far up from us. But the ability to go, oh crap, this is happening, but then to be able to think about it in a logical way. Again, it's one of those memories where my heart was in my mouth for about 30 seconds, going, all right, we need to think about how to get out of here.
Yeah. And for those who don't understand the seriousness of ice, and let's face it, most of the listening population would have flown on an airliner and probably never given it a second thought. But in something like a caravan, you do have boots on the front, so they're off the leading edges of the wings, so there are ways to deal with ice that collects. But
there are, but we didn't have them because it was a seaplane. So.
Right. Okay, that's a whole new level. But and even then, what came to my mind was weight. So you were already saying that the EX is a heavy caravan, and so every litre of ice you pick up is an extra kilogram of weight that you're taking on that you probably didn't have that much margin for.
No, exactly. So it was. It was definitely one of those heart in the mouth moments, and it was the first time I've experienced how quickly ice can form. So, definitely something I don't want to experience again in a hurry.
Yeah, fair enough. If you were given an expense-free opportunity to be endorsed on any airframe, which would it be and why?
747-400. It's the classic long-haul airliner, which I think for many of us, especially the mid to late 90s and early 2000s, just to be able to see, it doesn't matter what tail you had on it, but just to see the four engines, that long upper deck, and the wingtips on it. It's one of those pinnacle aircraft in aviation, and you hear from pilots that have flown it. It does everything it says on the tin, yet more, and everything about the 400 is just, for me, it's beautiful. So don't even have to think twice about that one.
You answered very quickly. And you've already given some advice, but just finally, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out in aviation?
I think the big thing is that be prepared to accept you're going to make mistakes, but learn from your mistakes. And as I alluded to earlier, just go and make a name for yourself in aviation, because you never know where it can end up. And I hope for, getting my story across, it says the same. You never know what door may open at a given time and a given place. That's the one big thing. If I can inspire people to do what I did, and if one person then gets their dream shot out of it, then I've done the right thing.
100%. And I think, the key that I got out of the way you shared your story today was understanding that, or not thinking that oh, that couldn't happen to me. What happened to Alex couldn't happen to me, because that is so false.
Exactly. You're right. It is so false. It can happen to anyone with the right mindset and in the right place at the right time. And I've said this before, there's nothing special about the way I fly, or, I don't proclaim to be a Chuck Yeager. It's just as long as you're a competent and safe pilot, adhere to the rules and have a good name for yourself within the industry. And by that, even just going up and meeting people, then take every opportunity that comes your way.
Mm-hmm. Yep, great advice. As this episode with Alex Penrose draws to a close, we extend our gratitude to you, Alex, for sharing your riveting aviation journey thus far. Alex's tales from seaplanes in tropical havens to commanding high-performance jets over iconic cityscapes have painted a vivid portrait of the diverse and thrilling world of corporate aviation. Alex, until we catch up at some point in the future, may your horizons be vast, your wings be steady, your dreams forever airborne, and I'm sure your grandfather is very proud of you.
Thank you, mate. It's been an absolute blast to talk to you today. It's been really enjoyable for me to also reminisce as well.
Join us next time for more fascinating discussions. Subscribe now on your favourite podcast platform, and if you'd like to help out, feel free to leave a review. That'll help spread the word. Alternatively, you can listen to the podcast on the HiflyMedia YouTube channel. Music for the podcast is titled Dance With Me by Asher Lee, available at upbeat.io. The HiflyMedia Podcast, uncovering the people and passion behind aviation, one story at a time.